James, what do you suppose the reaction will be from around England, not just to this result, the performance, but specifically for Gareth Southgate, who seems to be kind of the place where all the criticism comes to lie at the end of the day?
Yeah, well, it's because, you know, these fans see these players perform week in, week out at the very highest level for their clubs. And, you know, you could argue you've got the player of the year in England in Phil Foden, the player of the year in Spain in Jude Bellingham, and maybe the player of the year in Germany in Harry Kane, all in one team. And they don't necessarily see the same, it doesn't generate the same excitement, the same kind of dynamism when they play for England. And, you know, that's always been the criticism of Gareth, is that I think he had an innate conservatism that's come from his experience as a player. He knows that England's tournament history prior to him taking over has not been great. They've obviously only ever won the one tournament in '66. And for years, you know, the patterns have been familiar. England have played within themselves in tournaments. They've often looked tired. They've not been able to control the ball well enough. They kind of lose the midfield battle. And Gareth's really transformed and redefined the England team in his 8 years. But the last question that he really has to answer is, now that they're a different entity, now they are a team that can go and take a tournament, you feel, by storm. They've got these players. They don't need to be scared of their own shadow, but, you know, cowed by their own history anymore. Can he be that manager who can go and put this team on the front foot and really take a tournament by the scruff of the neck? And when they play like this, it just starts to reinforce those doubts that people have about him at the back of their minds. And I was saying to someone earlier, actually, I went up to Newcastle to do the other game, the Bosnia game on Monday. And England weren't great in the first half there either. And I think had that game not been in Newcastle, where I think there was a genuine warmth towards the team, they hadn't played in the city for 19 years, so there was a real, you know, desire to see England at St James's Park. But I think had that game been played at Wembley, or perhaps somewhere in the country where they're a bit more accustomed to seeing England, I think they'd have been booed then as well. And they were booed off at half-time here. They were booed off at full-time here. And, yeah, not with any great vigour, not with any great anger. For balance, there were quite a few who stayed and applauded them off as they sort of did a little lap of appreciation as a kind of goodbye before they head to Germany. But it just tells you there's still that undercurrent. And I think a lot of it is aimed towards Southgate because of what these players have done at club level consistently and how well they've performed and how exciting they look.
So I got to wonder if this is going to change in the coming days. But the odds makers still have England as one of the top favourites for the European Championships. Nedum, what's your level of confidence right now in this England team as you look at some of the other favourites there?
Well, you know, through my lifetime, I've seen them win lots and lots of things, Sebi, so my confidence is always very, very high. Historically successful nation when it comes down to football, but I think the odds makers, they always have this sort of bias towards England, and you can see it, as Stevie's been saying, with their attacking power and potential, it'd be very, very tough to just completely rule them out. Not least of all when, say, for example, if we have the starting 11 that was up just before, you could bring on the likes of Cole Palmer and other players who've had real significant influence in their domestic seasons as well. So I am a believer in them. I think the performance and the result today as such isn't great as such, but you know, I've seen them be a lot worse, and I've seen them at times almost carry a false sense of like confidence into tournaments as well. I think these guys are very, very driven. I think they know themselves that they're capable of winning this tournament, and they'll approach it as such. I think some of the little details that we saw today and in the game at Newcastle, they won't be doing that when they're playing against Denmark, when they're playing against Slovenia. You know, I think they're going to be a different side. I think they're going to approach it in a certain manner, and they're going to be ruthless. And I think that's one of the reasons why in recent tournaments they've managed to get to those later stages. And obviously they have fallen short, but, you know, at times it's just little moments. But I'm a believer in them. But I think the same can be said for France, Spain, and all those other teams that you mentioned before.
James, are we to the point where the only way this can be a success for England is if they win it? It's a failure if they don't?
Well, yeah, I mean, it does feel as though the bar is very, very high. I mean, obviously they lost the final in this stadium 3 years ago. They lost a very, very tight game to France in the quarterfinals of the Qatar World Cup. And again, going back to the point I made earlier about the sort of journey this team has been on under Gareth Southgate, you know, he's quite open about it. You know, he can't really talk to the players about anything less than winning tournaments because of how close they've got. You know, these players, and again, we talk about everything that they've won at club level. You know, you've got players in there who've won Champions League. Jude Bellingham won the Champions League last week. You've got treble winners in there. And when they've come so close, and the guys who played know far better than me, you can't really talk to players like that in any other terms than going to a tournament and trying to win it. That's what they expect. That's the aspiration they have. That's the aspiration they expect the manager to have and the coaching staff, and it's all got to be geared towards that. Look, I mean, there's a lot of debate around whether Gareth Southgate will stay on. I think the FA, barring an absolute catastrophe in Germany, would want him to stay on through to the 2026 World Cup. His contract is up in December. All parties are suggesting they're going to look at that after the finals. He nearly walked away after the Qatar World Cup. There is a bit of a feeling that maybe there'll be time for a change if England don't win the Euros this summer, that all parties may feel, OK, this has gone as far as it can. 8 years, fantastic achievement. He's equalled Bobby Robson, I think, tonight with 95 games in charge of England. So he's had a fantastic run and achieved an awful lot. But it does feel as though now, if England don't take that final step, I think if they don't at least get to the final, and I say that with the massive caveat that I know that all things being equal, they'll probably have to play France in the semi-final, and that's the one team that would worry me as an England supporter. I still would worry in a 90-minute game about France and think, yeah, they've just got the pedigree, they've been there, they've done it, they've got the players, they're not going to be fazed by England's attacking talent. And again, another game of fine margins could go against England. But I think if they can clear France and get to the final, then there's not a lot left to fear.
You know who's smiling about James Spear of France? None other than Frank Leboeuf. Go ahead, Frank.
If I may, you know, I carefully listened to James, and I agree with him that Gareth Southgate has only one speech to make, and it's all about winning the competition. But what kind of speech do you think Didier Deschamps is doing to his player? What do you think Nagelsmann is doing, being the host? There is only one way to get the fans back, is to win the tournament. And it's going to be the same with Portugal, because Portugal, they have a fantastic team. So, yeah, I'm a believer too, like Nedum, that England can do it. But you have at least 4 teams who can do the same and can think the same way. So we cannot know before, you know, because you need to switch on the right time. You need, of course, a little bit of luck, and you need to believe a lot that you can do it. So, yeah, English people can believe they can do it, but again, you have maybe 4 or 5 other countries who believe the same.
I wondered how long it would be before we got back to the stage of, well, they've got to at least the final, and then it's about time they won it. Because it feels as though we haven't been there for a little while. Mm-hmm. But it used to be the norm, that every single time a tournament came along and England were in it, they're going to win it, it's got to be at least a final.
But were any of those teams as good as this one?
Aye. Well, some of these teams were better than this one, overall. You know, we're looking at this team, we've just spoken about this team and said going forward they look great, but defensively there's question marks. There's been plenty of England teams before this have looked great going forward and have been solid defensively. I mean, think about Rio Ferdinand and Tony Adams as a partnership.
Yeah.
And it was always, oh, we've got to be in the final. And recently it feels as though it's been dead sensible and everybody's like, well, you know, we don't want to put too much in this.
And they're making semi-finals and finals.
All of a sudden, we've reached it again. We're only winning it is good enough. And you know what's happened previously? It's gone right down the drain. And that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like it's going to happen again.